Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. I'm really excited to show you guys the brand new EcoFlow Delta 2 Max. Now, which one is it? Can you guys tell a difference? This is actually the new version and this is the old version. Now, inside this one here, the old version, it had lithium ion or NMC batteries rated at 800 charge cycles till 80% of the original capacity. They've actually upgraded the second gen to have LFP batteries or lithium iron phosphate batteries rated at 3000 charge cycles till 80% of the original capacity, but they take up the same exact footprint. The only thing that's different is the actual weight. This one, the older one, comes in at 48 pounds and the new one comes in at 51 pounds. Now, of course, there's some upgrades on this new version and that's what we're gonna talk about in this video. We're gonna put it through a ton of different tests and see how it actually performs. Now, before we jump into the actual testing on this power station, I want to break down some of the differences on this new model versus the previous gen. Now, I already mentioned the lithium iron phosphate batteries. That's one of the most exciting things, but there are some other upgrades that are pretty important. The next thing is they've upgraded the internal size of the battery. It's now 2048 watt hours of capacity versus the older that was 2016. They've upgraded the solar charge controller to handle 1000 watts of solar input versus 800. And one of the biggest things that they've changed is the actual noise of the fans. Now, EcoFlow is well known for their loud power station fans, and they've definitely been listening because these fans are truly upgraded and they make a huge difference. I'll be showing you guys that a little bit later in the video. Now, for actual price, this has an MSRP of $18.99, and there will be an 8% off discount code down in the video description to take $150 off, so you can pick this up for $1,749. Now, at the end of the video, you'll know if it's worth that price or not. I always try to make a very unbiased video and give you guys the facts about these power stations, so stay tuned. Let's jump right into the testing and see how this performed. Now, I've gone ahead and flipped the power station around so you guys can see the back here. Now, at the top, you have your charging input. The next section, you have your AC inverter, and then you have your DC output on the bottom. Now, most people that I know will purchase a power station this large so they can run their home appliances during a power outage. Now, this one's really good for that. Right here, you have your AC inverter with the 6 outlets where you can plug in your appliances, and you just push this button to turn it on. Now, this one's rated to put out 2400 watts. It's supposed to be a pure sine wave at 120 volts. And what does all that mean? Well, it basically means that this puts out very similar power to your power company, so you can plug in your appliances and you shouldn't have any issues at all. Now, this works really well because this takes 2 expansion batteries for up to 6 kilowatt hours of capacity, so you can get a really long runtime on your home appliances. So let's jump into the testing that I did on the AC inverter. One of the best use cases for a large power station like this is to run your home appliances during a power outage or even while off grid. I wanted to test some common appliances on the Delta 2 Max to see how they would fare. First, I connected the Delta to my full-size microwave. This microwave is rated at 1000 watts, and when running it pulls slightly under 1800 watts on the inverter. These large microwaves are known to have large surge current, and if you have lights on the same circuit, usually you'll see them dim down when the microwave kicks on. During my testing, the Delta 2 Max handled the load without any issues. In the next test, I wanted to see if the Delta 2 could power my large 10-inch compound sliding miter saw. This is the largest saw that I have in my tool arsenal, and it pulls quite the surge load. As I powered up the saw using the Delta 2 Max, it didn't even struggle to handle the load. Here's a demo of me cutting a 2x4 of cedar. You can see the surge wattage went above 2700 watts when the saw kicked on. In the last test, I wanted to see how long the Delta 2 Max could run my full-size basement refrigerator with one EcoFlow smart battery attached. Now, with the extra battery attached, the setup has a total capacity of 4096 watt hours. Now, this fridge is an older model fridge and it isn't very efficient. When the fridge compressor is running, it pulls around 165 watts, so let's go ahead and let the test run.
Many hours later.
Checking in on the fridge 56 hours later, the battery capacity was sitting at 5% remaining. This definitely proves how capable the Delta 2 Max could be running common household appliances if you lost power or were fully off grid. Let's go ahead and check to see the quality of the power that the Delta 2 Max puts out. By pushing the inverter to the maximum output for 15 minutes, we can see if it holds the full rated wattage without overheating or experiencing voltage drop. Once I enabled the inverter and connected my max load, it was pulling slightly under 2400 watts. After the test had been going for a few minutes, I checked the output with my oscilloscope. It was a super crisp sine wave at 60 Hertz, and using my voltmeter, I could also see it was sitting at a really steady 120.5 volts output. Very impressive voltage output even under max load. Once the test had been going for 11 minutes or so, the power station fans had hit their highest speed. When testing the loudness of the fans, I was getting around 46 decibels at 3 feet away, and here's a demo of what the fans sounded like. Now these fans are super quiet compared to the previous generation of the Delta series. For example, the fans on the first gen put out 60 decibels, and this is what they sound like. Now I'm so glad they finally listened and upgraded the fans to be much more quiet on these power stations. Within the next couple minutes or so, my stopwatch hit the 15-minute mark and the Delta 2 Max passed the max load test. I then stepped up the load to 2600 watts because I wanted to see how well the power station fans were dissipating the heat. I recently purchased this thermal camera to get a visual image of thermal performance. And throwing some images up on the screen, you can see the warmest parts of the power station were where the exhaust fans were blowing out the hot air on the right side of the power station, and the top was also getting a little warm from the inverter underneath the lid. Now the EcoFlow Delta 2 Max is advertised to have an ultra-fast home backup switchover feature, or EPS mode. This means that when you have the power station plugged into the wall, it can pass this power straight through the power station into your devices. If the grid power goes down, the power station will automatically swap over to the batteries within 30 milliseconds. Now from my previous experience, this probably isn't fast enough to rely on for desktop computers or servers. In order to test this out, I had a micro desktop workstation running a stress test to push the internal power supply to its limits. I also ran my 24-inch LED monitor and studio lights off the power station so we could visually see the lights flicker during the transition of power sources. I simulated 5 different power outages by unplugging the power station from the wall. 3 out of the 5 times the PC was still running after it was unplugged, but twice it did shut down, meaning that transition to battery power wasn't super reliable. This feature will work well for regular household electronics like a full-size refrigerator, but I wouldn't rely on it for computers or servers. Some of my viewers power sensitive electronics like ham radio equipment or portable speakers on their power stations, and for that reason, I like to test for noise or interference on the inverter. Using my dirty electricity meter, the reading was around 1535 millivolts of noise when the inverter was enabled. With it reading around this level, you usually don't hear an audible buzz from the inverter. And to confirm this, I plugged in my guitar amp into the inverter and the output was really clean, and this is what it sounded like. You shouldn't have any problems running sensitive electronics or radio equipment off the Delta 2 Max inverter. Now this is much improved over the Delta 2 that was launched earlier this year. For example, that inverter puts out around 2000 millivolts of noise, and you can hear an audible buzz on the inverter. Pretty interesting, the difference between these two inverters. The final AC tests that I completed on the Delta power station were both for the AC capacity and AC idle tests. When draining the power station at a 0.2C rate via the AC inverter, I was able to pull 1790 watt hours of capacity as the state of charge hit 0%. The result of 1790 watt hours is 87.4% of the advertised capacity. Now I also did a second AC capacity test using one of their smart batteries for a total capacity of 4096 watt hours, and taking that down at a 0.2C rate, I was able to get 3600 watt hours, or 87.8% of the advertised capacity, so slightly improved as you add on additional expansion batteries. Now how much power does the AC inverter use if it's enabled and sitting idle? I started with the power station at 100% state of charge and left the inverter enabled for 10 hours with no load, and when I came back it was sitting at 92% state of charge, meaning the inverter had used around 8% of the battery, or 0.8% per hour. These are excellent results since most power stations use 1.5 to 2% per hour while the inverter is left enabled. Wow guys, very impressive results while testing the AC inverter. We got the peak output of 2400 watts. It was at 120 volts on the inverter, and we got a clean sine wave output. So plugging your appliances in and running them off the inverter, you're not gonna see any issues. Now I really liked that the fans were super quiet, 60 decibels on the previous gen, all the way down to 46 decibels. So when you're in the same room as this, it's just really quiet. Now I also like that they have some sort of filtering on the AC inverter as well. The dirty electricity meter and my guitar amp both came back clean on this power station, so good improvements there. And for the actual capacity, we got 87% of the advertised capacity while discharging this. And then we added the second battery and also got 87%, so really good results there. Now the only complaint that I can have is actually the EPS swap over, or the UPS functionality. I just wish it was a little bit faster. It's not gonna work with desktop computers or servers. It's only going to work with like refrigerators, lights, and other appliances. It's still useful, but not necessarily as perfect as what it could be if this was going to be a perfect power station. So just keep that in mind. If you want a UPS functionality, this one's going to have a little bit slow of a swap over. But overall, very good results, especially when compared to the previous gen of this model. Now, what about running your 12-volt gadgets or charging up your mobile devices? Now, this is very similar to the first gen. On the back, you have a 12-volt cigarette plug with a dust cover and 255/21 barrel connections. On the front of the power station, you have 6 USB ports. You have 2 100-watt USBc power delivery ports, and you have 4 USB-A ports, 2 of which are fast charge supported. Let's go ahead and test these out to see how they perform. The first thing I checked with the Delta 2 Max was to see if the DC output was regulated. This means the DC voltage stays the same even while draining down the power station. When I plugged in my battery load tester, it was showing 12.4 volts, and looking at the specification sticker, the nominal voltage of the battery pack inside is 51.2 volts, so the output is definitely regulated. In the next test, I tried to pull as much power as possible from each of the available 12-volt outputs. Connecting first to the 12-volt cigarette plug, I was able to pull right around 139 watts. Connecting to either the 55/21 barrel ports, I was able to pull 137 watts from each port. I then tried to pull the maximum power from 2 different ports at the same time to see if I could get any more power. It appears that there is a set limit right around 139 watts, and then the power station shuts off the DC output from being overloaded. Since the output is fairly limited, don't plan on running any high power DC loads from these ports like diesel heaters or DC air compressors. I then moved on to testing all 6 USB ports on the front of the power station. Now, this model supports 2 100-watt USBc power delivery ports, and I was able to charge both my EcoFlow River 2 and River 2 Pro at 60 watts and 100 watts respectively. For some reason, my Energizer 320 that takes in 100 watts wasn't wanting to work with the Delta 2 Max. USBc can be pretty buggy sometimes, so I'm not surprised to see this issue. I also tested the 4 USB-A ports by plugging in a USB fan, my smartphone, an LED light, and my wireless microphone kit. With all 6 USB ports in use, I was able to pull around 185 watts total from the power station. In the next test, I wanted to see what I could get from the DC output and USB ports all maxed out at the same time, and plugging in all these devices, I was able to pull 317 watts continuously from the DC output. If you're planning to run a small DC fan, CPAP, or 12-volt fridge overnight, it's important to make sure that the DC output won't automatically turn off after a given amount of time. Luckily, EcoFlow has both AC and DC timeout settings in their smart app that keeps this from happening. In order to test these settings out, I plugged in my EcoFlow Glacier 12-volt fridge into the 12-volt cigarette port. I was running this as a single zone set to 37 degrees. I came back after 24 hours and the DC output was still on and the fridge was running. The battery had only dropped down to 84% during this test, meaning one could get a very long runtime on a 12-volt fridge using this power station. The final tests I completed on the DC output were capacity and idle power usage tests. While draining the power station completely down via the 12-volt socket at 10 amps, I was able to pull a total of 1,676 watt hours over a 14-hour time period. These results were about 81.8% of the advertised capacity. This is a normal result since the 12-volt output is regulated down from 48 volts and has a slightly higher efficiency loss. In the next test, I like to see how much power the DC output uses while sitting idle while left on for a long period of time. I started the test at 100% state of charge on the power station, and checking in 10 hours later, it was at 98% state of charge, meaning the DC output is very efficient and only uses 0.2% per hour while sitting enabled with no load. Now, summing up the results of testing the DC output, it does have a regulated output of 12.4 volts. It didn't have any auto shut-off settings because you can adjust that in the smart app. And we had really good standby losses, only 2% over a 10-hour test. Now, as for the total peak power, we saw 140 watts output. Now, that's going to be really good for 12-volt fridges, CPAPs, and other small devices, but you won't be able to run the larger ones like diesel heaters, 12-volt air compressors, and you kind of can't plug this into a van life setup or an overlanding rig because you're limited to 10 amps. So just keep that in mind. Now, this is basically identical to the previous gen. I think I really would have liked to see a little bit of an upgrade, maybe a 15 amp output or a 20 amp output, just because there's so much power available in this, but we are limited to the 10 amps output. Now, the EcoFlow Delta 2 Max has the ability to connect up 2 expansion batteries, and I have one of these here. So this is very similar. It's lithium iron phosphate batteries on the inside as well. It's rated at 2,048 watt hours of capacity, so you can connect 2 of those up, and and you get over 6,000 watt hours on the actual Delta 2 Max. So very cool that you can get a much longer runtime if you have these expansion batteries. But how does it work? Well, this has a very similar footprint to the Delta 2 Max. It's just a little bit shorter, and that's because this does not have an AC inverter in it. It's just the battery, so they can save on weight and space. Now on the top, there's a storage compartment, and you open that up and you can get the actual connection cable. Now it's really easy to plug in. You plug one side into the smart battery, and then you plug the other end into the power station, and they automatically sync up. So you have the ability to extend your run times if you purchase these smart batteries. Now just keep in mind, there's only a screen and this port on the side of the device, which is compatible with EcoFlow and their devices. You do not have USB ports or any charge or discharge ports. You only have this port here that connects up to their power station or other EcoFlow devices in their ecosystem. So kind of a bummer you can't use this as a standalone, but it still offers a pretty decent price to extend the capacity, either to double it or triple it, to get a much longer runtime during power outages. In the next section of the video, I want to go over all the charging basics for the Delta 2 Max. On the back of the power station, you have 3 charging ports underneath this small flap. Looking closer, the center charging port is designed for internal AC charging. You don't have to worry about lugging around external charging bricks on the power station. The 2 left charging ports are XT60 inputs. Both of these ports have a voltage range of 11 volts all the way up to 60 volts, and they will automatically limit to 15 amps. Each port supports up to 500 watts of charging. Out of the box, you'll get 3 different cables. You get a 5521 to 5525 DC adapter cable, a 12-volt car charging cable, and lastly, you get an AC wall charging cable. You'll need to purchase solar charging cables separately. Now, when connecting the Delta 2 Max to a 12-volt power source, you'll see around 100 watts charging input. This will take around 20 hours to fully charge up the power station when completely empty, so don't rely on this charging method to fill it up very quickly. You can speed up the 12-volt charging time by taking your car battery's 12 volts and doubling it to 24 volts with a small boost converter. This hack gives you around 190 watts charging input and will cut the 12-volt charging time in half down to 10 hours. Now, I have an entire video on the topic of faster car charging that will include at the end of this video, so check that out if you are interested. Now, what about charging at 48 volts? I recently purchased this EG4 48 volt 100 amp hour server rack battery. Remember, when connecting our charging sources to the Delta 2 Max, we do not want to go over 60 volts. Now, this battery should never go higher than 60 volts even when fully charged. So let's go ahead and connect it up and see how many watts we can get. In order to get the fastest charging rate, I'm using EcoFlow's XT60i solar charging cable with the metal pin. When connecting this up to the Delta Max, I was able to max out one of the charging ports at 500 watts. I also wanted to try connecting up a second cable from my 48 volt battery, and when I connected both of them up, I was able to get a maximum of 1,000 watts charging input. Now this just shows you how useful these server rack batteries can be. Imagine using these as a DIY expansion battery. Future video maybe? Now the fastest way to charge the Delta 2 Max is by connecting to an AC power source. The EcoFlow supports extreme charging with up to 1,800 watts input. This will get the power station from 0 all the way up to 100% state of charge in a little over 1 hour. I was able to see a little over 1,700 watts during my testing with the AC charging input. The Delta 2 Max also features adjustable charging input that you can adjust on their smart app. You can change the charging rate from the max 1,800 watts all the way down to 200 watts, and I love the ability to adjust the charging speed to your desired level. In the next section of the video, I want to take the Delta 2 Max outside and demo a few different solar arrays to see if we can hit the maximum charging input via solar panels. Okay guys, let's go ahead and do some solar testing on the Delta 2 Max. So I have these 2 arrays that I'm going to be using. This one here, I'm going to do a 2S 2P configuration. These are 180 watt solar panels. And then right here, I have some special 180 watt panels. These have a really low VOC, so I can connect 3 of these together in series without going over the 60 volts. So I'm excited to see what we can get on both these arrays. Now for the actual solar conditions today, it's pretty clear. We do have some mixed clouds, but I do have a really good window of sun right now, so let's see how much power we can get. Okay, so for the first test, I have these 480 watt panels in a 2S 2P configuration, and I have them plugged into one of the XT60 ports on the back. Let's go ahead and see how many watts we're getting. Okay, so with this solar array, we're getting a full 500 watts input on one of the charge ports on the back. So we are over paneling slightly, but yeah, you can hit the 500 watts easy. So let's go ahead and try the other array. Okay, so I've gone ahead and moved the Delta 2 Max over here to these 3 panels. Now remember, we're not going over 60 volts. These have a low VOC. Let's see how much power we're getting on the Delta 2 Max. Okay, the glare was so bad outside I couldn't see the screen, so I put it inside my shed. It's connected to the 3 panels in series. Look at that, we're getting 500 watts input. So we're also hitting the input limit using those 3 panels. So what happens if we connect both of them up at the same time, because this has 2 charging inputs? So now I have both arrays plugged in. I have this one plugged into the back, and I have this array plugged into the back. You guys can see a little bit closer here. I have both charging ports going into the back of the power station. See how many watts we're getting now. Look at that, guys. We're getting 1,000 watts input. So definitely possible to hit the charging limit for solar on this power station. And I kind of like the freedom of having 2 different solar arrays. It allows you to use different panels and still max out the charging input. Now, my last test, I want to show you guys what it'll do if you have 4 of these 180 watt panels. Now, you can't connect these all together in series, so I've split this up. I have these 2 in series and then these 2 in series, and I've connected that into the back of the Delta 2 Max. So let's see how many watts we're getting with these 4 solar panels. So here's a closer look at the setup. You can see these are connected in series, these 2 are connected in series, and then they're both plugged into the back of the power station. So with all 4 of those panels plugged in using both charge controllers, you can see we're getting 746 watts input right now. So even if you don't want to max this thing out, it's pretty capable using both charge controllers. So I'm pretty impressed with the output of these solar panels here. Now, if you're interested in them, these are the BougeRV 180 watt 9 bus bar solar panels. And I picked up a 5th one for $130 on Amazon. It was on sale. So you can usually find these for a pretty good price. I'll include the link down to these in the video description. Now, if you're looking for just 3 panels, these are going to be your go-to option. These have around 19 volts open circuit, so connecting them together in series stays under 60 volts. And you can see we maxed out the solar charging input on these. Now, these are the New Power 180 watt panels. I don't think they make them anymore, so if you're going to be looking to pick these up, you want to pick them up soon, especially if they're still in stock. I'll include the link down for these in the video description as well. Now, what about dual charging the Delta 2 Max? Well, technically there are 3 charging ports on the back, so I'd call this triple charging. When I connected all AC charging and DC charging sources at the same time, I was able to charge at over 2,500 watts input. This charging speed will allow you to fully charge the power station in a little less than 1 hour, and having so many different charging options gives you a lot of flexibility. As my final charging test, I wanted to test pass-through charging, or the ability to charge and discharge the power station at the same time. In this test, I had the DC output, USB ports, and AC inverter all enabled while charging the Delta at the same time from AC power. I was running a large 1,500 watt electric heater, and looking at the screen, you can see that the Delta 2 Max was able to both charge and power the loads at the same time without any issues. Now let's go ahead and break down the smart app for EcoFlow. Now, to connect to the Delta 2 Max, you have to bind it, which I've already done, so we'll go ahead and click on that. Now, this is available through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Now, once you get to the home screen, you have your estimated time remaining with your actual battery percentage. And then at the bottom, you get a breakdown of your watts input and your watts output. And I like that it breaks this down into AC input and the 2 DC ports. And then for the output, you can actually toggle these on and off. So you can turn these all off, and then it shows the wattages on each one. Now, there are a ton of settings in the app, so let's go ahead and open that up. Now, you have the ability to rename the device. You can turn on and off the beep. For energy management, this is cool because it allows you to set the discharge and charge levels. So if you want to get more charge cycles over the life of the power station, you can set this to an 80-20 mix, and you use less of the battery reserves. Now, you also can adjust your charging AC input. So if you want to charge via the AC input at different speeds, you can adjust that and kind of move that wherever you want. So that's really cool. You can do the same thing for car input all the way up to 8 amps. And you can also, if you have the smart generator, you can set that when to turn on and off, which is really cool. I have a whole review on the dual fuel smart generator. Now for the output, you can turn on X boost. This will allow you to run purely resistive loads, and it'll drop down the voltage below 120 volts. So it works specifically for certain devices that are only purely resistive. What's nice is you can adjust the timeout on all the outputs. So the unit itself, the screen, AC inverter, and DC outputs. And most importantly, you can upgrade the firmware on this device. You can see I'm already running the latest firmware. Lab features are kind of features that they're testing out. So you can set up automation. This will allow you to set these charging options during certain times of the day. Now, I haven't experimented with this too much, but solar charging, you can set this to be a priority, which is really cool. Now, another really cool feature is the AC always on, basically meaning that once it hits 0% and power is restored, the AC inverter will turn back on. So I haven't experimented with either of these yet, but really cool features that they're working with. Now, help and feedback, This is really cool because if you have any issues with the power station, you can contact EcoFlow support right in the Smart app. You can change your home style page and you can change the temperature units from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So overall, very clean setup on the app and it always works really well. Now, one of the most common questions that I get when I review these power stations is, what about the actual warranty? And do they even have good customer support? Now, EcoFlow has a 5-year warranty on their products, so that's really good. And you also have multiple ways to reach out to their customer support. For example, you can call their phone number and talk to someone over the phone. You can email them, or you can even open their Smart app and connect to them via the support feature in the Smart app. So really cool there. Now, I do have personal experience working with EcoFlow's customer support. For example, my original River Pro, the DC output died from me pulling way too much power from it. And I reached out via the Smart app, gave them the serial number, and within a few hours, I already had an RMA ticket and I was able to ship that off, and within 3 weeks, I got it back to me in fully working condition. Now, I didn't tout that I was a YouTuber. I didn't use my YouTube email at all. I basically used my personal email, and they worked really well with me, and I was very happy with their customer support. So from my personal experience, they have really good customer support and a really good warranty. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the video. I've completed all my testing on the EcoFlow Delta 2 Max. Now, it could just give you my opinion about the power station. You can make a decision that way, or I could give you a facts-based power station grading system so you guys could see the true performance, especially compared to all the other power stations I've tested on the channel. Now, this power station grading system breaks down the performance, the price, the feature set, and any issues that I find. So it's really helpful to kind of make a decision on if it's a really good power station, or if it scores really low, it's a very bad power station that you should avoid. So how well did the Delta 2 Max do? Well, there are 10 points available. I have a ginormous spreadsheet with all this information. I'll include the link down in the video description so you guys can check that out. Let's go ahead and jump into the scoring for the Delta 2 Max. So on the screen, I'm going to give you guys a breakdown for each scoring category. Now, it did get a full point because it charged up to 100% within 4 hours. It does support pass-through charging. It has a pure sine wave inverter that has 120 volts output. It has a regulated DC output. It does have an informational display and Smart app connectivity. We didn't see any auto shutoff settings when we were testing it. It met 85% of its advertised capacity, and it did charge within 5 hours using solar panels. Now, this does support UPS functionality, but it was a bit slow, so I'm only going to give it a half point here. And for the price per watt hour, I'd like to see 80 cents or less for a really good deal. This one comes in at 85 cents per watt hour, so I'm going to give it a half point here. So we get a total score of 9 points out of 10 points available, which is pretty respectable for the Delta 2 Max. Now, just remember, you can check out my power station grading sheet down in the video description. So let's go ahead and move on to the final section of the video where I just give you guys some final thoughts about the Delta 2 Max. Now, I definitely feel this is an upgraded version over the previous gen. Now, what did they improve? Well, it's got the lithium iron phosphate batteries, many more charge cycles on this. It's got the upgraded solar input. You can get 1,000 watts via 2 separate charge controllers versus 800 on the one before. Now, I was kind of bugged at the beginning that it had the 60 volt cutoff. I really like to have the power stations that go up really high on the voltage input, but having 15 amps on 2 different charge controllers, it's just really capable. And not everyone has a ginormous solar array that they want to connect up. And so it kind of makes sense to have 2 medium-sized charge controllers. Now, what does this really do? Well, it allows you to dual charge with 2 car charging inputs, which is pretty cool, or 2 solar arrays, or you could do a mix and match of each option. So I really like the fact that they've gone with 2 solar charge controllers with this. Now, another huge upgrade over the previous gen is the actual fans. They are so quiet on this model, guys. I wish you guys could hear it in person. The previous gen was just so loud, and these ones are super quiet. So, this is pretty similar to the previous gen, but there are some significant upgrades, and the price actually comes in pretty decent with the discount at $1,749 or 85 cents per watt hour. So I'd love to get your guys' feedback on what do you guys think about the Delta 2 Max. So throw your comments down below. Is it the perfect power station for you? How would you plan to use this? I'd love to get your guys' feedback. Now, I personally feel that this is a really good power station for home backup use. Now it will kind of work on a portable use, maybe if you're powering things off the AC inverter, but the DC output doesn't put out a ton of power, so I don't think it'd be really good for a van build or an overlanding rig. Maybe if you were just powering a few USB devices and a 12-volt fridge, it would work well for that. But you're gonna need a lot more amps if you want to power, a van build and plug this into that. So this is really, really good for the AC output. The inverter put out 2,400 watts, really clean output. So for running your home appliances, this will work really well, and especially if you purchase the expansion batteries to really make this last a long time. So thank you guys so much for watching. Really interesting to test out the brand new Delta 2 Max. Now for future content, I have a ton of really cool video ideas. I have some video ideas about that 48-volt battery and how you can integrate it into larger power stations like this. I also have tested a ton of these 2,000 watt-hour power stations, so what about an actual comparison video between all these different brands to see which one's the best? If you guys want to see that content, throw a comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you like the content. We'll see you guys in the next video.